Good morning or good evening. Yes, I'm doing this video early Wednesday morning. And this is a video on how to solve three equations, a system of equations where there's three variables. So here's our three equations, our three variables. And the way we're going to go ahead and do this, we're going to do this using matrices, and we're going to be using the elimination method and solve for x, y, and z. So to put this into a matrix format, what you do is you write down the coefficients of each variable. So on the x, 1, on the y is 3, on the z is a 1, and then our constant is 10. Okay, then the next row, that's row 1, row 2, 1, negative 2, negative 1, negative 6, and then the third row, okay, and this is our matrix. And we separate the coefficients on the variables from the constants with a bar or a line. Okay, now what we're going to start doing is we're trying to go ahead and move from this to this right here. This is the identity matrix. And once we have reached this, then we can identify what x equals, because notice x is in the first column. So this one represents 1x. So 1x, or just x, equals the answer. This column represents y. So in this column we have the 1, so 1y. And so y equals some number. And finally in the third column we have z, and so we go down here to this one, and that would be 1z equals some number. So z equals some number, and then we will have our answers. We'll have x equals, y equals, and z equals our answers. Okay, so how do we go about doing this? Well, there's some things that we can do in a matrix. We can multiply equations. We can multiply all the way across by a number and then combine it in order to form a new row. So what we're going to do is, and this just comes with practice, guys. You actually have to think, and the more you practice this, the easier it will get. For some of you, it might be really frustrating for you, but hang in there and keep trying. So I'm going to go ahead, and I'm looking for a 1 here. Well, I got a 1 here, so that's good. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look for putting a 0 here. Notice here I'm trying to get a 0 here. So I'm going to go ahead and do this. Make it this a 0. So I'm going to multiply row 1 by negative 1. Okay, if I multiply row 1 by negative 1 and then add it to row 2, that's going to give me a new row 2. Okay, and then I'm going to do the same thing for row 3. I want this to be 0. So I'm going to multiply row 1 by negative 2 and then add it to row 3. And that's going to give me a new row 3. Okay, so let's see how this comes out. So we have negative 1 times 1 is negative 1 plus row 2 is 0. So row 1 is going to stay the same, because remember, what's going to change here is row 2. So 1, 3, 1, 10. So 0. Negative 1 times 3 is negative 3. Negative 3 plus negative 2 is negative 5. Negative 1 times 1 is negative 1. Negative 1 plus negative 1 is negative 2. Negative 1 times 10 is negative 10. Negative 10 plus negative 6 is negative 16. Sorry about that, guys. On the third one, on the next equation, we're going to get a new row 3. So I decided to multiply row 1 by negative 2 and then add it to row 3 to get a 0 here. So negative 2 times 1 is negative 2 plus 2 is 0. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6. Negative 6 plus 1 is negative 5. Negative 2 times 1 is negative 2. Negative 2 plus 2 is 0. Negative 2 times 10 is negative 20. Negative 20 plus 10 is negative 10. You know, it's kind of like solving a Rubik's Cube, because little by little we're getting it to be like what we want it to end up, like this, the identity matrix. Okay, so now what we're going to do next is, so what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and switch row 2 and row 3. Switch them around, and the reason I'm going to do that is because I don't want a 0 here. Looking at your identity matrix, I would rather have the 0 here. So it's one of those things that, you know, you have to think about what you have and where you're going. So I'm going to go ahead and switch row 2 and row 3. Okay, next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to see if I can get a 0 here. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and multiply row 2 by negative 1 and then add it to row 3 to get me a new row 3 because I want a 0 here. So negative 1 times row 2 plus row 3, and that's going to give me a new row 3 with a 0 here. So negative 1 times 0 is 0 plus 0 is 0. That's good. Let's rewrite this real quick. Okay, negative 1 times negative 5 is 5. 5 plus negative 5 is 0. Yay. Negative 1 times 0 is 0. 0 plus negative 2 is negative 2. Negative 1 times negative 10 is 10. 10 plus negative 16 is negative 6. We're building this identity matrix little by little. Okay, you got to think. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go back up to the top. But what should I do next first? Well, we need this number to be 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and divide this row by negative 5. So I'm going to take row 2, this whole row here, and divide it by negative 5. And I need this to be a 1, so I'm going to do this step as well. I'm going to divide this row here by negative 2. So row 3 divided by negative 2. Alright, let's see what we get. So going back up to the top, rewriting the first row, because that's not going to change. 1, 3, 1, 10. Dividing the second row by negative 5. So 0 divided by negative 5 is 0. Negative 5 divided by negative 5 is 1. Bingo. 0 divided by negative 5 is 0. And negative 10 divided by negative 5 is 2. Okay. Dividing row 3 by negative 2. So looking down at this, we have our third row, so 0 divided by negative 2 is 0. 0 divided by negative 2 is 0. Negative 2 divided by negative 2 is 1. And negative 6 divided by negative 2 is 3. How we doing? It's getting to look a lot like an identity matrix. And we're almost there. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and make this a 0 right here. So I'm going to multiply row 2 by negative 3. And then add it to row 1. And that's going to give me my 0, my new row 1. So negative 3 times 0 is 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. Negative 3 times 1 is negative 3 plus 3 is 0. Negative 3 times 0 is 0 plus 1 is 1. Negative 3 times 2 is negative 6. Negative 6 plus 10 is 4. And then we will keep everything else the same. Then I just need a 0 here, and I'll have my identity matrix. So I'm going to go ahead and multiply row 3 by negative 1 and add it to row 1. That will give me my new row 1. Okay, so multiply 0 plus 1, 1. Multiply times 0, 0 plus 0, 0. Negative 1 times 1 is negative 1 plus 1 is 0. Negative 1 times 3 is negative 3 plus 4 is 1. Everything else stays the same. Alright, we're ready for our answers. Do you remember what this column represents? X. So that means that X equals 1. Second column represents Y. So we have Y, 1Y, or Y equals 2. And then the third column has a 1 in it, and that's our Z. So 1Z, or Z, equals 3. Okay, we're going to practice this in class, and practice, and practice. Our test is coming up next, tentatively, thinking on Tuesday, maybe, next week. Somewhere around that time period, Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday, probably Tuesday, though. That's what I'm shooting for. Hope you guys are having a great night. Rewatch this video, study it, and we're going to practice it in class.